3CR Radiothon 2024, Sound On for Solidarity.
Coming up is a podcast brought to you by the dedicated and diverse volunteers at 3CR. Just a quick message before you get there. For the month of June, we're asking listeners to donate to the station to help us keep going. We rely on the generous donations of community to survive. Go to 3cr.org.au/donate and show your support for community-owned and community-run media. Thanks for your support and happy listening.
Sabah al-Khair, good morning dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Mashni and Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi.
Palestine Remembered is Australia's only English-language radio program that is totally dedicated to Palestine. We'd like to welcome those listening on 855 and those that will join us on podcast at 3cr.org.au.
Thanks for joining us. Stay with us and enjoy the episode.
Good morning, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Palestine Remembered. Unfortunately, we've awoken to the news of another tent massacre. Israel has dropped bombs on another tent village, another tent refugee camp, for killing tens of Palestinians thus far. And I'm sure in the coming days we will see that this massacre will be as bad as the last one. The world remains silent. Benjamin Netanyahu was on the air claiming that America is slowing down the delivery of weapons. Give me the tools so I can finish the job, he claimed in a piece to camera that was sent to the United States. Sickeningly, the United States, which could end this genocide overnight. Israel is demanding a 24/7 and getting a 24/7 supply chain of weaponry to continue this genocide. It ends within 24 hours of the United States saying no more. Sickeningly, that video, that piece to camera that was sent and circulated throughout the United States, created a circumstance where the White House went into overdrive. No, we're not denying Israel all the weaponry they need. We're sending them everything they want. In a sickening display of lack of humanity, of complicity, shameful. History will judge this administration, the United States, Western imperialism, harshly. We're never going back to quote-unquote normal. We're never going back to October 6th. Israel and its Zionist supporters, and remember, most Zionists in the world are not Jewish. Israel is an imperial outpost, a vassal state, part of empire. It will collapse, as all evil regimes will collapse. It will collapse, and I want to tell my listeners, our friends, our supporters, that the moral bankruptcy that we have seen in the West will ensure that this not only collapses soon, but in fact within our lifetime. Israel, the apartheid state, will not make its 100th birthday. It will not make its 100th birthday. During the week, Israeli defense spokesman, General Hagari, I think he's a general, he said on the 20th of June, this is 257 days after the genocide happened. 257 days after killing 50,000 or more Palestinians, devastating the entire region. After 257 days, he said, Hamas can't be destroyed. You would think that might make the machine slow down or stop. Nothing. This has never been about Hamas. This has always been about conquest, about defeating an indigenous people, but they'll fail. Today, if you search Al-Shifa Hospital, you will see in the devastation that is Gaza, in the devastation that surrounds the Al-Shifa Hospital complex, makeshift scaffolding has already been erected. The Palestinians and indigenous people, unconquered and unbroken and deriving their strength from their indigeneity, are rebuilding Al-Shifa as we speak. further proof that we will not be conquered or broken. During the week, the United Nations released a report. Chris Sidoti, a wonderful Australian jurist, had the most beautiful line. He spoke about Benjamin Netanyahu, who keeps talking about how Israel is the most moral army in the world, and he said, I'll leave Benjamin Netanyahu to define morality. I'm not equipped or skilled, trained to speak about morality, but what I can speak is about legalities. And I would say that Israel has amongst the most criminal armies in the world. And if you haven't seen that clip, it's been circulating on social media. Just Google Chris Sidoti and you'll quickly come upon it. Israel is amongst the most criminal armies in the world. It's most criminal because we know it's deprived Palestinian hostages in Gaza, the Palestinian hostages of Gaza, in the concentration camp that is Gaza. For 259 days now, food, gas, electricity, water, shamefully aided and abetted by a compliant and silent West, diplomatically, in the media, and particularly in big chunks of the global north, militarily. Israel's losing. It knows it's losing, which is why it's looking to expand its war to bring in, quote-unquote, the West. But we're hopeful to have somebody to speak about what's going to happen, what we think might happen. In the border with Lebanon, there was footage posted recently from Hezbollah drone that flew undetected all over the north of historic Palestine, detailing targets, GPS coordinates, and no mention from the Israeli regime as to how that happened. The fear must be absolutely palpable. All that is happening in a context of Palestinian oppression and a military state driving itself into full and outright, increasingly more fascist. Benjamin Netanyahu dissolved his war cabinet in a desperate attempt to stay out of jail. This war has never been about the hostages, never been about Israeli captives. It's always been about his political survival and enacting his genocidal vision, his father's genocidal vision of a Palestine without any Palestinians. The challenges that 48 Palestinians, that is Israeli Palestinian citizens of so-called Israel, where they are getting imprisoned, taken away from their homes for Facebook posts. In occupied East Palestine, aka West Bank, the oppression, the military incursions continue unabated. In Jerusalem, the Palestinians are increasingly having to juggle their lives, walk in groups to ensure they're protected. Back to Gaza, and very quickly, and we cannot forget the starvation, particularly in the north of Gaza. The water table, the water system has completely been poisoned. Palestinians are dying of dehydration. Palestinians are dying of malnutrition. Palestinians are dying of starvation. Meanwhile, the West continues to speak about Israel being this beacon of democracy, and we are and remain complicit. And people will not forget. None of our supporters are going to forget. We are aware. We will hold you to account, whether that is today, tomorrow, or next election cycle, whenever it might be. The reality is the masses are awake to the lie that Israel is a democracy, that Israel is a normal country. It's not a normal country. It's a rogue, genocidal apartheid state, and its time has surely come to an end. Next up, an interview I did with Nick Hanna, who's an Australian-Lebanese gentleman. He's a solicitor. He put a movie together called The Last Sky, and what motivated him to make this brilliant movie about Palestinian resistance, Palestinian refugees in Lebanon and in Palestine. You can find details of it on Instagram at thelastskyfilm. Thanks for listening. Tell your friends, share the podcast, and remember, there's never been a better time for free Palestine.
Sound on for solidarity.
3CR Radiothon Fundraiser, June 2024.
To donate, call 039419 8377 or donate online at 3cr.org.au.
3CR Radiothon 2024. Sound on for solidarity.
Stand in solidarity with Palestine this Sunday.
Hi, it's Nasser Mashni from Palestine Remembered, Australia's only dedicated show on Palestine. Join me every Saturday morning at 9:30 and very importantly, get along to our rallies. Sunday, 12 o'clock, State Library. Join us.
We have to mobilise to show our support for Palestine. 12 p.m, State Library, this Sunday.
Rally to demand freedom and justice for Palestine. No war on Gaza.
Free Palestine Melbourne is a 3CR supporter.
And next up, our special guest today, Mr. Nick Hanna, who's a solicitor in Sydney. He's a fantastic ally of the Palestinians. He's from the Levant. Good morning, Nick. How are you?
Hi, Nasser. How are you?
Really well. And I'm so excited to have you on the show. I saw the movie a week and a bit ago. Tell us a little bit about The Last Sky, and then we'll go backwards and find out why you did it all.
The Last Sky is a documentary that explores three key and related questions. The first being what this war in Gaza is really about. The second being why so many Palestinians support the armed resistance. And finally, why Israel and Hezbollah are on the brink of a full-scale war in Lebanon. And in addressing these questions, I've focused on the perspective of the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. And I have used interviews that the producer of The Last Sky, Rahab Shraidi, and I conducted with refugees in the camps earlier this year, as well as back 20 years ago in 2004. And we also use footage that Rahab and I filmed in the occupied West Bank back in 2004, as well as a lot of rich archival footage that we were generously given access to that is largely from the Nakba, occupied Palestine, and from Lebanon, specifically of the Israeli invasions of Lebanon from the late 70s until 2006.
One of the things that I really enjoyed, the 20-year disparity between some of the conversations, revisiting families, etc. Maybe let's just not spoil the film for everybody, but just one of the stories of the difference in the 20 years between Rahab and yourself going the first time and the second time.
Sure. So without giving away too much, in the film, there are some interviews with some Palestinian elders in the refugee camps in Lebanon, both in Shatila refugee camp in Beirut and Ain al-Helwa refugee camp in Sayda, which is in the south of Lebanon. And those elders survived the Nakba, so they were expelled from their villages in 1948 by Zionist militias. They fled to Lebanon and they were living in the camps ever since until I met them with Rahab in 2004. We interviewed them, we recorded their oral history, and then we sort of toyed with the idea of making a film. That was initially the aim, but when we came back from the Middle East, this was on a trip that I'd done to the Middle East where I spent the better part of the year there. Back in 2004, I took a year off uni to go there. And when I came back, life had other plans for me and we'd never made a film and the interviews were just sitting there. And when I went back this year, I really wanted to meet those elders. Unfortunately, the elders that we'd filmed had passed away, but I was able to meet with the surviving son of the main female elder that people will see in The Last Sky. He's really the star of the second part of the film. He's very outspoken, very articulate.
Let's not give away too much. Everybody must see it. It's The Last Sky. And tell us about the website where people can get more details, Nick.
So we're building a website at the moment. For now, all of the information is on Instagram at thelastskyfilm. And the website should be up in a couple of weeks, hopefully by the end of June, but it more likely will be early July. But all of the information about the film for now is on Instagram, including announcements about screenings.
At The Last Sky Film. Instagram. We'll put a link to that in the podcast. So if you're listening to this on your favorite podcast channel, you'll be able to follow Nick and the film The Last Sky, which is at The Last Sky Film on Instagram. Nick, you're a lawyer. You said 2004 you took a year off uni, went to Palestine, Lebanon, explored your roots. You're a criminal solicitor. How does a criminal solicitor end up being a filmmaker?
Well, I'm a lawyer. That's what I've done for the last 16 years. But at the risk of sounding cheesy or cliche, I'd like to think I'm a human first, and I'm someone who cares about the world, and the Palestinian cause has always had a special place in my heart. When I was younger, before I did law, I was very active in Palestine solidarity work, mainly involved in fundraising activities for the refugee camps, but also advocacy work, organizing protests, everything that young activists do. And the love for Palestine has obviously never gone away, but I did become a lot less active as my legal career took off and set up my firm, and life takes over. So I haven't had anywhere near the amount of involvement that I had when I was younger, but it's still something, again, that's a cause that I'm very passionate about. And after the genocide started in October last year, I think, as with millions of people around the world, I just felt like I had to do something, felt compelled to act. And initially it was raising funds. So we organised a fundraiser in Sydney last November, which was a great event and raised lots of money, but I just couldn't help but think afterwards that fundraising is just not enough. And this is, in essence, a political problem and not a financial problem. And so I thought the best way for me to assist was to raise awareness, and journalism is a key way of doing that. Journalism is not something that I ever studied, but it's something that I always had an interest in, something that I thought perhaps many years down the track, when I retire from law, it's something I would take up more seriously. And so I decided to go to Lebanon at the end of last year. I went for a few weeks in December and January, and I went with Rahab, who I'd gone to Lebanon and Palestine with back in 2004. And the idea wasn't to make a film. I've never done this before, and I really didn't even know where to begin to make a film. The idea was just to make perhaps a few short videos. I had experience doing that for the law firm, making TikTok videos. And I thought, okay, I'll make some videos just to help raise awareness, because I was so frustrated about the lack of awareness here. And people, I'm someone who moves in a lot of different social and professional circles. I don't just have Arab and Palestinian friends. And since October 7, obviously the war in Gaza has been one of the main topics of discussion. And so you speak to people and you sort of get shocked because you're reminded how little the general public knows about Palestine.
The good thing about this movie is that it has a sense of 101 about it. But whenever you talk about 101, you don't ever talk about resistance, because you're trying to take somebody on a guided discovery tour of Palestinian humanism and, Nakba to today. Whereas this is a very detailed 101 and experiential 101 that actually talks about resistance. Protest movements, activism for Palestine or action for Palestine can take so many different ways, whether it be rallies or whatever. Art is something that is so very important because it touches different people. And so thank you so very much for this work. With respect to that, talking about resistance, which is the hardest thing to talk to polite white society about, Chardonnay sipping society. What has been the discussions you've had with audiences or lay people around the movie? And in particular around the resistance part?
So the resistance, and specifically the armed resistance, is one of the central themes that I explore in the film. And the key reason for that is that I have found it to be one of the aspects of the conflict about which people know the least. And the reason for that is that it's, as you said, a taboo topic. It's not a topic that's ever covered by the mainstream media. That is the reasons why Palestinians have engaged in armed resistance and why much of Palestinian society supports the armed resistance. And obviously in Western media, the Palestinian armed resistance is demonized. Our law prescribes most Palestinian resistance organizations as terrorist organizations. And so there are some practical and legal difficulties in discussing these topics. And I just really thought it was crucial that people had an understanding of what is the Palestinian resistance and why so many Palestinians supported, and to have that conversation in a frank, mature, and what I consider to be a fair way. And as you perhaps have noticed from the film, my target audience is not Palestinians.
Mm-hmm.
As much as I love it when Palestinians have come to the screenings and told me that they really enjoyed the film and value it, they're not who I'm trying to reach with this. I don't want to be preaching to the choir. I want the broader population to hear this message and to hear the voices of the Palestinians in the camps who support the armed resistance, so that we can have a better informed conversation as a society about this central issue. Responding to your question about the feedback that I've had, I'm not sure whether the audiences that have come to the screenings have been very representative. I think they're mostly allies, but a lot of people have come who are not Palestinian and who are not Arab and who are not Muslim. Some of them are people that know me from the legal world. Some of them are people that I know from other communities, and then their friends and their friends and their friends. Word spreads. And these are people who, whilst they might be supportive of, or consider themselves to be supportive of the Palestinians in general and think what Israel's doing now in Gaza is horrendous, they're people who don't really know much about the history of the conflict, specifically, or in particular, the history of the armed resistance and why Palestinians have felt that it's their only real option that's been left to them in order to reclaim their rights, specifically the right to return and the right to statehood.
Listeners, we're speaking to Nick Hanna, who is a filmmaker as well as being a solicitor. He's released a film called The Last Sky. You can find details about it on Instagram at thelastskyfilm. There'll be a link to that in the podcast. Now, Nick, you're a solicitor. Tell us a little bit about your pro bono work you're doing for Palestinians, or for Arabs, Palestinians, anyone suffering racism, etc., post October 7.
So I'm one of many lawyers based in Sydney, and I'm sure there are similar groups in Melbourne and across Australia, groups of criminal defence lawyers who are providing assistance to people who've been arrested in relation to their activism or solidarity with the people of Palestine over the last 8 months. The largest number of cases that such lawyers have been involved in have been people arrested at protests, specifically in New South Wales. I'm not sure about in Victoria, but in New South Wales, it's been people who've been arrested in the course of protests that involve direct action. And I'm speaking specifically about the 2 protests at Port Botany against the Israeli shipping line Zim. And those protests involved hundreds of people who went down to Port Botany in November and then again in March to block the entrance and exit of that port so as to stop a Zim ship from its operations occurring effectively. And those people were hundreds went, but at each protest, a couple of dozen protesters were arrested. And those protesters were charged with a new protest law, which we have in New South Wales. Again, I don't know if there's an equivalent provision in Victoria, but it was a law that was brought in recent years in response to climate protesters engaging in similar sorts of action. And it provides heftier penalties for people who decide to block what are described as major facilities, and a major facility includes a port, and it imposes a maximum penalty of a jail sentence for conduct that previously was only dealt with by fine-only offences. And so I've been one of several lawyers who have been assisting the protesters with those cases. I've actually finished the 2 matters that I had, and along with another lawyer, we were able to secure non-convictions for our clients, which is really important because a criminal conviction can obviously have far-reaching consequences for people, whether that's their ability to find employment, whether that's their ability to obtain visas so that they can travel, whether for holidays or to see their family. And so that was really important, and hopefully has set a precedent for other protesters who have their matters dealt with in the court, at least in New South Wales.
Indeed, and that's why it's so important for us to make sure we do everything we can not to allow, draconian laws to come in, because you don't know what they come in for, and then where they get applied.
That's right, the slow creep, and that's what happened here. These laws were brought in again in response to protesters who were taking direct action in support of the climate cause, protesting against our government's inaction in relation to climate change. And they're now being used, I think, on a much larger scale against Palestine protesters.
The 24 that were arrested, Nick, do you think they were targeted? Were they leaders, or were just the 24 they grabbed?
It was a mixed bag. In some instances, there were leaders. Some of them were marshals. Some of them who are people who had been speaking on the night. But others were everyday people who were there, nurses, factory workers, teachers, you name it. Every profession was represented amongst the arrestees.
All of them human beings saying, stop the genocide. Why is Australia not doing more? Why is it not fulfilling its obligations under the Genocide Convention of the Rome Statute? Why aren't we doing more?
That's right. They come from all walks of life, but they're all united with the call to end the genocide and to try to put pressure on the government and on major corporations to cut their military and other ties with Israel.
It's the 22nd of June. When's your next showing and where is it? Because there'll be details on Instagram at thelastskyfilm. But when's your next screening?
Our next screening is on the 4th of July at Casula Powerhouse in Sydney. And after that, we have a screening at Point Hoyts Bankstown on the 20th of July. These are our first two screenings in Southwest Sydney, so we're excited about those. And there are a range of screenings being organised in smaller towns by local Palestine solidarity groups. We've got screenings coming up in Coffs Harbour, Byron Bay, the Blue Mountains, Ballarat, a town near Melbourne that I've forgotten the name of, but they'll all be announced on the Instagram in due course. And perhaps if there are listeners who are going to be listening back to this after early July, they will be able to hopefully find our website at www.thelastskyfilm.com.
Beautiful. Nick Hanna, solicitor and producer extraordinaire and humanitarian. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Nasser. It was an honour.
Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Free Palestine! No more murder, no more lies! No more murder, no more lies! Free Palestine! Free Palestine!
.3CR Radiothon 2024. Sound on for solidarity.
Did you enjoy listening to that podcast? 3CR is a community radio station, and you, the listener, are a part of that community. Right now, it's our radiothon. We need you to pitch in with a few dollars to keep the station going. We can't do it without you. It's easy. Head to 3cr.org.au/donate.